They laughed at the single black dad's rags. The custodian stood on stage in a penthouse ballroom, 40 stories above Boston's financial district, wearing a faded work uniform with a bleach stain across one sleeve. His boots were held together with electrical tape. 200 of the city's wealthiest donors sat watching, their tuxedos and gowns worth more than he'd earn in a year. Behind him, the New England Philharmonic, a $1 million orchestra, had just gone completely silent. Every musician had stopped playing. Their instruments hung limp. Their eyes were locked on him, not their conductor. The maestro's baton still moved through the air, but no one followed. His face had gone from red to pale in the span of 15 seconds. The only sound in the room was a single guitar. The custodian's fingers moved across the strings with a precision that didn't match the duct tape on his boots. His hands, calloused and dark-skinned, marked by years of mopping floors, played notes that made a 60-year-old concertmaster lean forward in her chair, mouth open. In the front row, a little girl in a school uniform was crying. This wasn't supposed to happen. An hour earlier, the conductor had mocked this man in front of witnesses, had pointed at his worn clothes and called them rags, had told him he didn't belong anywhere near a professional stage. Now that same conductor stood frozen, utterly eclipsed by the man he'd tried to humiliate. Someone in the audience was filming on their phone. The view count was already climbing. If you believe that true dignity can never be taken, only revealed, stay with this story. Because what happens next will prove that the quietest man in the room can carry the loudest truth. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? But to understand how a custodian in rags silenced Boston's elite, we need to go back 3 weeks, to a man the world had forgotten, and a single moment that changed everything. They laughed at the single black dad's rags. But to understand how a custodian in rags silenced Boston's elite, we need to go back 3 weeks, to a man the world had forgotten, and a moment that changed everything. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? The fluorescent lights in Cornerstone Tower's 40th floor hallway buzzed like dying insects. So Terrence Holloway pushed his cleaning cart past empty conference rooms, the wheels squeaking against polished marble. It was 2 a.m. The financial district slept around him, glass towers dark except for the red blink of aircraft warning lights. He was alone. He preferred it that way. Terrence was 45, tall and solid, with salt and pepper locks pulled back in a neat ponytail. The skin on his hands was darker at the knuckles, lighter across the palms, marked by years of bleach and industrial soap. His custodian uniform hung loose on his frame. The navy fabric had faded to gray in places. A permanent stain spread across one sleeve where he'd spilled cleaning solution 3 years ago. His name patch was fraying at the edges. His boots were held together with electrical tape. He moved through the executive suite methodically. She emptied the trash, wiped down the desks, vacuumed the carpet in straight lines. His supervisor liked straight lines. Terrence had learned not to care about things like that. He cared about the paycheck. He cared about health insurance. He cared about keeping his head down and his daughter fed. The rest didn't matter. By 4 a.m, he was on the red line heading home. The train car was nearly empty. A nurse in scrubs sat 3 seats down, asleep against the window. Terrence watched the darkness outside blur past. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. A tired man. An invisible man. The sun was rising when he reached Mattapan. He walked 2 blocks to the triple-decker he rented on the 2nd floor. The stairs creaked under his weight. Inside, the apartment was quiet. Nia's bedroom door was closed. She'd be awake in an hour for school. Terrence moved to the kitchen. Medical bills sat stacked on the table. He didn't look at them. He'd looked at them yesterday. The numbers didn't change. There was a letter from the Boston Youth Symphony on top of the pile. Nia had been accepted into the advanced program. $3,000 per semester. The letter congratulated her on her talent and dedication. Terrence folded it carefully and set it aside. He made coffee. Drank it, standing at the counter. Through the wall, he heard Nia's alarm go off. Heard her feet hit the floor. She appeared in the kitchen doorway 5 minutes later, wearing pajamas, her natural hair standing in all directions. "Morning, baby girl," he said. "Morning, Dad." She rubbed her eyes. "Did you just get home?" "Just now." She sat at the table. Terrence poured her cereal, set the bowl in front of her. She ate quietly for a moment. Then she looked up. "Did you see the letter?" "I saw it. Can we afford it?" Terrence met her eyes. She was 11, but she understood money. She understood that her father worked 2 jobs and still counted pennies. She understood that the guitar wrapped in cloth in the hall closet had never been played, not once in her memory. "I'll figure it out," he said. She nodded. Didn't push. She never did. On Sunday morning, Terrence braided her hair. They sat in the living room, Nia cross-legged on the floor, Terrence on the couch behind her. His fingers moved with practiced care, sectioning and weaving. She did her math homework while he worked. "Dad," she said after a while. "Yeah. Why don't you ever play guitar anymore?" His hands paused. "Oh, just for a second." Then he kept braiding. "That was a different life, baby girl. But you still have it. In the closet. I know. So why don't you play?" Terrence tied off the last braid, smoothed it with his palm. "Some things are better left alone." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were serious. Too serious for 11. "Mom would want you to play," she said softly. Terrence's throat tightened. He touched her cheek. "Your mom wanted a lot of things. I'm doing the best I can." Nia nodded, turned back to her homework. The conversation ended, but the weight of it stayed in the room. That night, Terrence worked his second shift at a grocery store in Dorchester. He stocked shelves until midnight, rode the bus home, slept for 4 hours, woke up and started again. This was his life. Quiet, small, invisible. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night, Terrence arrived at Cornerstone Tower for his shift. He punched in at the service entrance, loaded his cart with supplies, took the service elevator to the penthouse floors. When the doors opened, he heard music. He stepped into the hallway. The sound was coming from the ballroom at the end of the corridor. Terrence pushed his cart forward slowly. Through the half-open double doors, he could see an orchestra setting up. Chairs arranged in arcs. Music stands. A woman tuning a violin. A man in a suit was directing workers, pointing at the stage, barking orders in a clipped European accent. Terrence stopped at the threshold. He'd cleaned this ballroom 100 times, but he'd never seen it like this. Never seen it alive. The orchestra began to play. Terrence's hands stilled on the cart handle. The music was a concerto. Strings and woodwinds building a melody that sounded like it came from another century. Then a guitar joined in. The notes were technically perfect, but something was missing. Terrence listened. His jaw tightened. The guitarist was playing it wrong. Not wrong in the notes. Wrong in the heart. The phrasing was stiff. The emotion was flat. It was music played by someone who understood theory, but not truth. Terrence turned away, started down the hallway toward the offices. But the music followed him. It crawled under his skin. It pulled at something deep in his chest, something he'd buried 7 years ago and sworn never to touch again. He kept walking, emptied the trash in the first office, wiped down the desk, vacuumed in straight lines, but his hands were shaking. The music came through the walls like a memory refusing to stay buried. Where Terrence stood in the hallway outside the penthouse ballroom, one hand on his trash cart, the other gripping a black garbage bag. The orchestra was rehearsing inside. Strings and woodwinds wove together in a pattern that sounded centuries old, then shifted into something modern. Flamenco rhythms underneath Baroque structure. Then the guitar came in. Terrence's hand tightened on the bag. The notes were perfect, technically flawless. Every measure hit exactly where it should, but there was no soul in it, no fire. The guitarist was playing the piece like a man reading instructions instead of telling a story. He stood very still, his breathing slowed. The music wrapped around him, and with it came the past. A stage, dim lights, the smell of cigarette smoke and old wood. He was 23. His fingers moving across strings like they'd been born there. Wynton Marsalis stood 10 feet away, trumpet raised, watching Terrence with something like awe. The crowd at the Village Vanguard didn't make a sound. They barely breathed. When Terrence played the final note, Marsalis lowered his trumpet and just nodded. That was all. Just a nod. It had meant everything. The memory fractured, shifted, a different room, smaller. Sunlight through cheap curtains. Grace sat on the floor with her back against the wall, a canvas propped on her knees. Paint stained her fingers. She watched Terrence play, her dark eyes soft, her smile private. She didn't care about the audiences or the contracts or the future everyone said was his. She cared about the man, just the man. The memory cracked like glass. A hospital room, fluorescent lights too bright. But machines beeping. Grace's skin was pale against the white sheets, her body skeletal, her hair gone. She held a tiny bundle wrapped in pink. Nia, 3 months early, 2 pounds, 4 ounces. Grace looked up at Terrence, exhausted and terrified, and whispered 5 words that ended one life and started another. She needs you more than music. The memory shattered. A living room. A man in an expensive coat examining Terrence's Gibson ES 175. The guitar Marsalis had played during their jazz standard residency. The man handed over a check. $8,000. Terrence had paid 10 times that for the instrument. The man walked out with it like it was luggage. Terrence stood in the empty room and felt nothing. By then, feeling nothing was a mercy. The phone rang. A recorded voice. Debt collector. 42,000 outstanding. Medical bills. Credit ruined. Please call back. Terrence blinked. The memories released him. He was in the hallway again. The orchestra was still playing. The guitar part was still wrong. He forced himself to move. Opened the trash bin, dumped the bag inside. The plastic rustled loud in the quiet hall. Through the ballroom door, he could see musicians bent over their instruments. A man in a dark suit stood at the front, conducting. His baton moved sharply through the air. Terrence turned away, pushed his cart down the hall, but the music followed. It crawled under his skin. It found the places he'd locked away and pried at them with patient fingers. Without thinking, he began to hum, quiet, just under his breath. The same melody the guitarist was playing, but the way it should sound. The way it would sound if someone understood that music wasn't about notes on a page. It was about what lived between them, the silence and the ache and the truth no one wanted to say out loud. Footsteps echoed behind him. Terrence stopped humming. A woman in black concert dress walked past carrying a violin case. She glanced at him, her brow furrowed slightly, like she'd heard something she couldn't quite place. Then she kept walking. Terrence waited until she disappeared into the ballroom. Then he kept moving, emptied trash in the executive offices, vacuumed the conference room, wiped down the windows overlooking the city. Boston sprawled beneath him, lights glittering in the darkness. He didn't look at it. He looked at his reflection in the glass. A custodian in a faded uniform. A man who mopped floors and emptied trash and went home to a daughter who asked questions he couldn't answer. And the orchestra finished their rehearsal just before dawn. Terrence heard them packing up, their voices echoing through the hallways. He stayed out of sight, waited until they left. Then he finished his route and punched out. The red line was nearly empty at 6 in the morning. Terrence sat by the window and watched the city wake up. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. The train rattled through tunnels and over bridges. A nurse in scrubs slept 3 seats away. A construction worker with paint-stained hands scrolled through his phone. At Park Street, a busker set up near the exit. Young kid, maybe 20. He had a beat-up acoustic guitar and a coffee can for tips. He started playing as Terrence walked past. Some blues standard, not bad, not great. Terrence's steps slowed, just for a second. The kid hit a chord progression Terrence knew by heart, had played 1,000 times, could still play in his sleep if his hands would let him. He kept walking, up the stairs into the morning light. The music faded behind him, swallowed by the noise of the waking city. But that night, when Terrence closed his eyes in his narrow bed in Mattapan, he heard it again. The orchestra, the wrong guitar, the melody that should have meant something but didn't. And underneath it all, like a pulse he couldn't silence, he heard what it could have been. 1 week later, Terrence arrived at Cornerstone Tower with his daughter beside him. Nia walked half a step behind, her cello case bumping against her leg. She was 11, small for her age, with natural hair pulled back in careful braids. She wore her school uniform, navy jumper, white shirt, wore knee socks that were starting to slip. Her book bag hung heavy on one shoulder. "You can do your homework in the hallway," Terrence said quietly as they rode the service elevator up. "Stay quiet. Stay out of the way." "I know, Dad. And if anyone asks, you're working. I'll be invisible." The youth symphony rehearsal space had flooded that morning. A burst pipe, the email said. Practice canceled. Terrence had called every babysitter he knew. No one was available on 3 hours' notice. So Nia came with him. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. The penthouse ballroom was chaos. Event staff rushed between tables covered in white cloth. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light. The orchestra was setting up on a raised platform, musicians tuning instruments, the sound discordant and alive. And Terrence found the service hallway near the ballroom's rear entrance, a quiet corner, out of sight. "Here," he said. Nia sat cross-legged on the floor. She pulled out her homework, spread it beside her, then positioned her cello between her knees. She didn't draw the bow, just moved her fingers along the neck, practicing scales in silence the way he taught her. Terrence watched her for a moment. She looked so much like Grace, the shape of her eyes, the way she bit her lip when she concentrated. "I'll be close," he said. She nodded without looking up. Terrence pushed his cart into the ballroom. The space was massive, chandeliers hanging from a ceiling 30 feet high. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the financial district. The chairs needed arranging, rows and rows of them, each one placed exactly right. He worked methodically. Lifted, positioned, adjusted. His hands knew the routine. The orchestra was rehearsing on stage. A man with white hair stood at the podium, conducting. His movements were sharp, precise, anxious. Terrence recognized tension when he saw it. A phone rang somewhere backstage. Raised voices followed. The conductor's baton stopped midair. "What do you mean he's sick?" the voice carried. European accent, cultured, barely containing panic. "Food poisoning, maestro. He can't perform." "Tonight? He calls in sick tonight?" Terrence kept working, set up another row of chairs. The conversation wasn't his business. A man in a suit walked onto the stage carrying a guitar case. Younger, nervous. He pulled out the instrument and took his position with the orchestra. The conductor raised his baton. They started the concerto again. Terrence's hand stilled on a chairback. He knew this piece. He'd heard it all week during their rehearsals. But this guitarist was different from the one before. The notes were there. The timing was perfect. But something essential was missing. The conductor stopped them, started again. The guitarist played the same passage. Still technically correct. Still empty. Terrence finished the chairs and moved to the windows. He could hear the conductor's voice rising, frustration bleeding through the professional veneer. "More passion. This is flamenco, not a funeral march." The guitarist tried again. Terrence wiped down the glass and listened. The notes were hollow, a paint-by-numbers version of something that should have burned. An hour passed. The ballroom slowly filled with early arriving staff, caterers in white shirts, the event coordinators with clipboards, everyone moving with purpose. The conductor appeared in the ballroom doorway. He was in his early 50s, white hair swept back, wearing an expensive suit that fit like it had been tailored in Europe. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He was talking to a woman with a tablet, gesturing sharply. "The Tanglewood board is arriving in 90 minutes. This was supposed to showcase our ability to bridge classical and contemporary, and instead we have a replacement who plays like a metronome." His voice carried across the ballroom. Several staff members glanced his way, then quickly looked away. The man's eyes swept the room, landed on the service hallway, on the half-open door. He stopped talking, stared. Through the doorway, Nia was visible, sitting on the floor with her cello, fingers moving silently along the strings. Her homework spread around her. The conductor's face darkened. He walked toward the door, fast, purposeful. "What is that doing here?" The event coordinator followed, confused. "Sir, I'm not sure." A child, with an instrument, in a service hallway, during a professional event. His accent made every word sharper. He was standing over Nia now, looking down at her like she was something that had crawled in from the street. Terrence moved quickly. He was across the ballroom in seconds, but the man was already speaking. "Whose child is this?" Terrence stepped forward. His voice was quiet, steady. "She's mine, sir. I apologize. She'll stay out of the way, I promise." The conductor turned, really looked at Terrence for the first time. His eyes traveled slowly over Terrence's appearance. The faded custodian uniform, the bleach stain spreading across one sleeve, the fraying name patch, the work boots held together with electrical tape. Something ugly crossed the man's face, a look Terrence had seen before, a look that measured a person's worth by what they wore and where they stood. Your daughter. The word was flat. Of course. He gestured vaguely at Terrence's uniform, at the hallway, at Nia sitting small and still on the floor. Do you understand what's happening here tonight? This is a world-class orchestra. This is a million-dollar audience. This is the New England Philharmonic, not a community center. His voice was rising. Other people were stopping, listening. 2 catering staff near the kitchen door, the event coordinator, several orchestra members who'd wandered in from backstage. And I have to navigate a professional crisis while you bring your family to work like it's... He stopped himself, but the disdain was radiating off him like heat. Just keep her out of sight. This is not a daycare. Nia's face went very still. Terrence knew that look. He'd seen it before. At Grace's funeral when Nia was 7, and someone told her to stop crying because her mother was in a better place. The face of a child learning that the world could be cruel for no reason at all. Terrence's hands tightened at his sides, his jaw locked. Something ancient shifted inside him. The same thing that had cracked when Grace died. When the debt collectors called. When he'd sold his guitar and walked away from everything he was. But this time it didn't break him. It woke him. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at the man in the expensive suit, and he said very quietly, I can play your concerto. The ballroom went still. Every person in the room turned toward Terrence. The conductor stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. Excuse me? Terrence's voice stayed quiet, steady. Your guitarist, the replacement. I've been hearing you rehearse all week while I clean. I know the piece. The flamenco runs in the second movement, the counterpoint in the third, the solo cadenza at the climax. If you need someone who can play it with the emotion you're looking for, I can do it. Marlowe blinked, then he laughed. It started as a chuckle, then it grew louder, genuine, incredulous. He looked at the event coordinator like they were sharing a private joke. You're going to play with the New England Philharmonic? He turned back to Terrence, his smile wide and cruel. The custodian thinks he can perform a world premiere concerto in front of Boston's cultural elite. His eyes traveled over Terrence's appearance, slow, deliberate, the faded uniform with the fraying name patch, the bleach stain spreading across one sleeve like a scar, the work boots held together with electrical tape, the soles peeling away from the leather. Marlowe's smile sharpened. Even if you could play, which I sincerely doubt, we have standards, visual standards. You want to sit on stage with $1 million orchestra dressed in those rags? The word landed like a physical blow. Several people in the room flinched. One of the catering staff looked away. The event coordinator's face tightened. Nia, still sitting in the hallway, lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. She just watched her father. Terrence didn't move. His hands hung loose at his sides. His breathing stayed even. He looked down at his uniform, the same one he'd worn every night for 7 years, the one he put on so his daughter could have music lessons and new school clothes and a chance at the life he'd lost. Then he looked back at Marlowe. Let me audition, right now, 30 seconds. If I can't play it, I'll apologize in front of everyone and get back to work. If I can, he paused. You let me perform it tonight, in this uniform, in these rags, in front of your $1 million audience, and you apologize to my daughter. The ballroom was full now. Orchestra members had filtered in from backstage. Early arriving donors stood on the mezzanine, looking down. Everyone was listening. Marlowe's jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed. This was too easy, too perfect. A delusional custodian challenging him in front of witnesses. The story would be told for years. Fine, he said coldly. 30 seconds. Someone get him a guitar. A young man in black concert dress hurried backstage, returned with a Martin classical guitar. Decent instrument, nothing special. He handed it to Terrence. Terrence took it. His fingers touched the strings, and his hands started to shake. 7 years. He hadn't held a guitar in 7 years. His calluses had softened, His muscle memory had dulled. The weight of the instrument felt foreign and familiar at the same time. He closed his eyes. 3 seconds of darkness. And in that darkness, he saw Grace, their old apartment in New York. A sunlight through cheap curtains. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, a canvas propped on her knees, paint staining her fingers. Watching him play, smiling that private smile. Music isn't about perfection, she'd said once. It's about truth. The memory shifted. Nia as a toddler, 2 years old, bouncing on the couch to the rhythm of his playing, her laughter high and bright, not understanding the notes but feeling the joy underneath them. The memory fractured. The Gibson ES 175, the collector's hands closing around the neck. $8,000, the guitar Marsalis had played, walking out of Terrence's life forever. Terrence opened his eyes. He positioned the guitar, adjusted his grip. The room was watching. Marlowe stood with his baton raised mockingly in the air. The orchestra members were smirking. Nia sat in the hallway, her small hands pressed together. Terrence played. The concerto's opening solo was brutal, a flamenco run that required the right hand to execute rasgueado technique at high speed, while the left hand navigated a chromatic descent that most guitarists rehearsed for weeks. Technical, punishing, designed to separate amateurs from masters. Terrence played it perfectly, but he didn't just play it technically, he played it truthfully. His fingers found a counter melody in the bass line that the composer had missed, a harmonic undertone that transformed the piece from a technical showcase into something that sounded like longing, like loss, like love surviving impossible circumstances. It was the same thing he used to do at the jazz standard. The thing that made Wynton Marsalis stop mid-solo once and just listen. On the orchestra members' smirks faded. Their faces went slack. One violinist leaned forward, her mouth slightly open. Marlowe's baton, which he'd been holding in the air like a weapon, slowly lowered. The donors on the mezzanine stopped talking, leaned over the railing, and Nia, sitting in the hallway with her cello, stared at her father like she was seeing him for the first time in her life. Terrence played for 45 seconds, 15 more than Marlowe had allowed. Then he stopped cleanly, handed the guitar back to the young man, stood there in his faded uniform and taped boots, waiting. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then an older black woman in the first violin section stood slowly from her chair. She was in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back, her concert dress elegant. She stared at Terrence like she'd seen a ghost. "My God," she whispered, "you're Prophet Holloway." The woman's voice trembled. She stood from her chair in the first violin section, her hand pressed to her chest. Her dark skin caught the ballroom lights. Her gray hair was pulled back in an elegant twist. She stared at Terrence like she was looking at someone who'd come back from the dead. "I saw you play the Newport Jazz Festival in 2003, she said. "You were 23 years old. You made a Stratocaster sound like it was crying." She turned to the rest of the room. Her voice grew stronger. "I saw him at the Village Vanguard with Wynton Marsalis. I was there the night Marsalis stopped playing his own solo just to listen to this man. He had a Blue Note recording contract. People called him the next great American guitarist." She looked at Marlowe. There was steel in her voice now. "This man is not a custodian. I mean, he is, but he's also a virtuoso, a master, and you just mocked him for his clothes." Marlowe's face drained of color. The event coordinator was already pulling out her phone. 2 donors on the mezzanine were doing the same, fingers moving across screens. "Prophet Holloway," one of them muttered. "Here, there's footage." The donor held up his phone, a grainy YouTube video from years ago, a young black man with locks on a dimly lit stage, his fingers moving across a guitar like water. The sound quality was poor, but the music was unmistakable. The same voice, the same soul. The comments beneath the video all asked the same question. What happened to him? Where did he go? "This is him," the donor said, leaning over the mezzanine railing. "This is actually him. He vanished in 2006. Nobody knew what happened." Excited murmurs spread through the ballroom. Phones came out. More searching, more footage appearing. Articles from jazz magazines. Reviews from festivals. A younger Terrence on stage after stage, guitar in hand, audiences transfixed. Marlowe tried to recover. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped his baton. This is highly irregular, he snapped. We can't just allow someone off the street to perform with the Philharmonic, regardless of his past credentials. There are protocols, union rules, insurance liability. Lorraine cut him off. He just sight-read one of the most difficult guitar pieces written this decade and made it better than the composer intended. In 45 seconds. And after apparently not playing for years, she looked at Terrence. Something like awe crossed her face. If you won't let him play tonight, maestro, I'm not sure the orchestra will follow your baton. I know I won't. 3 other musicians stood. A cellist, a violist, the second violin. They nodded. The event coordinator stepped forward. Her tablet was still in her hands, but her expression had changed. She wasn't looking at a problem anymore. She was looking at an opportunity. Maestro Marlowe, she said carefully, I think we should allow Mr. Holloway to perform. The donors would be very interested. She gestured subtly to the mezzanine. The Tanglewood board members were watching, listening. One of them had his phone out, recording. Marlowe was cornered. His Tanglewood ambitions were watching him make a choice. If he refused now, he looked petty, afraid, small. If he agreed, he lost control of his own concert, but he had no choice. Fine, he said. The words sounded like broken glass. But if he's going to perform with the New England Philharmonic, he'll do it properly. Someone find him a tuxedo. Terrence shook his head. No, sir. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You said I couldn't play in these rags, Terrence said quietly. So I'll play in these rags. That was the deal. The ballroom went still. Every eye was on them. Marlowe's jaw worked. His face flushed red, then pale. But he couldn't argue. Not without looking worse. Not in front of the board. Not in front of the donors who were already texting their friends, spreading the word that something extraordinary was happening at Cornerstone Tower tonight. He turned sharply and walked backstage without another word. The event coordinator approached Terrence. She was smiling now, professional, efficient. Mr. Holloway, it will have you sit with the orchestra. I'll arrange a chair and a music stand. Your daughter... She looked toward the hallway where Nia still sat, watching everything with wide eyes. We'll give her a proper seat. Front row. Terrence nodded. Thank you, ma'am. The ballroom began to move. Staff adjusting chairs, musicians conferring in low voices, the donors on the mezzanine making calls. Word was spreading. More people were arriving. 2 journalists slipped in through the main entrance, cameras in hand, notebooks out. This was no longer a standard fundraiser. This was history. Lorraine approached Terrence. She stood in front of him, her violin bow still in her hand. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the gray at her temples, the decades she'd spent making music. I never forgot that concert, she said softly. Newport, near 2003. You played a blues standard that made half the audience cry. Then you disappeared. We all wondered what happened to you. Terrence looked down at his boots, the electrical tape, the uniform. Life happened, he said. She nodded, didn't push, just extended her hand. Lorraine Chen, concertmaster, it's an honor. He shook her hand. Terrence Holloway, custodian. Her smile was sad, knowing. Not tonight, you're not. 90 minutes until the concert began. The ballroom slowly emptied as people moved to prepare. Terrence walked back to the service hallway. Nia was still there, her cello beside her, her homework forgotten on the floor. He sat down next to her. The rental guitar rested against the wall. His hands still trembled slightly from playing, from remembering. Nia looked at him. Her eyes were red, not from crying, and from something else, from seeing her father in a way she never had before. Dad, she said quietly, why didn't you tell me? Terrence looked at his daughter. Her eyes were red, not from crying, from seeing him as someone she'd never known existed. Dad, she said again, why didn't you tell me? The hallway was quiet. The ballroom noise had faded. Just him and Nia, and the rental guitar leaning against the wall. 1 hour until the concert, 1 hour until he had to walk into that room and play music he hadn't touched in 7 years. He reached out, took her hand. His palms were rough from work, darkened at the knuckles. Hers were small, soft. She had Grace's fingers, long and delicate. "Because I didn't want you to think I gave up something important," he said quietly. I didn't want you to feel like you cost me anything. But you were famous." "I wasn't famous, baby girl. I was good. There's a difference." Nia looked down at their joined hands. "That lady said you played with someone. Winton somebody." "Marsalis." "Yeah, I did." "And you had a contract." "I did." "So you were kind of famous." Terrence almost smiled. "Maybe a little." She pulled her hand away, not angry, just needing space to think. "When did you stop?" He took a breath. Let it out slow. "I need to tell you some things about your mom." Nia went very still. Terrence leaned back against the wall. The fluorescent light hummed above them. He could hear the orchestra tuning in the distance, the discordant sounds of instruments finding their pitch. "I met her in New York," he said. "I was 22, playing a club in the village. She came in with some friends from art school. I saw her during my second set. She was sitting in the back, painting. Right there in the club, just painting what she heard." The memory was so clear it hurt. Grace with charcoal-stained fingers, her canvas propped on a table. Her eyes closed half the time, translating sound into image. After the show, she came up to me, showed me what she'd made. It was all blues and golds, abstract, but I could see the music in it somehow. I asked her to dinner. She said yes. Nia listened. Her hands were folded in her lap now. Patient. "We got married a year later. I had a scholarship to Berkeley by then. She was doing her MFA at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. We moved to Boston, got a tiny apartment in Allston. I was touring on weekends, playing festivals. The Blue Note contract came through when I was 23. He paused. The next part was harder. "Then you happened." Nia's head came up. "You were born 3 months early," Terrence said. 2 pounds, 4 ounces. So small I could hold you in one hand. They kept you in the NICU for 12 weeks. Your mom and I, we took turns sitting with you. Round the clock. I'd play shows, come straight to the hospital, sit there until dawn." His throat tightened. He kept going. "The bills started piling up. Insurance covered some of it, not all. I was missing tour dates to be at the hospital. The union started sending warnings, but I couldn't leave. You were fighting so hard just to breathe. I wasn't going anywhere." Nia's eyes were wet now. "When you finally came home, you were healthy, perfect, and I thought the hard part was over. Then your mom got sick." He heard Nia's breath catch. "You were too. She felt a lump, went to the doctor, stage 4. It had already spread. They gave her 6 months. We fought for 18. The words came easier now. He'd carried them alone for so long that speaking them felt like setting down weight. "I stopped touring completely, broke my contracts. The union blacklisted me. I didn't care. I sold everything we had to pay for treatments, experimental stuff, anything that might buy us more time. We burned through our savings in 4 months. I started working day jobs between taking your mom to appointments. She kept painting almost until the end, said it was the only thing that made sense anymore." Nia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, silent. "When she died, I had $40,000 in debt. You were 4 years old. You kept asking when mommy was coming home, and I had nothing left to give you except me." He looked at his daughter, really looked at her. "I sold my guitar, the Gibson your mom bought me for our first anniversary, the one Marsalis played during our jazz standard show. A collector gave me $8,000 for it. It paid some bills, not all. I took the first job I could find that offered health insurance. Custodian, night shift, and I rebuilt, one day at a time, one shift at a time, for you." Nia was crying now, not sobbing, just tears running down her face in silence. "I didn't give up anything, baby girl," Terrence said gently. "I chose you, every single time, and I'd do it again." She launched herself at him, wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her, felt her shoulders shake. Let her cry into his shoulder the way she used to when she was small and woke from nightmares. They sat like that for a long time. The hallway was cool. The building hummed around them. In the distance, the orchestra kept tuning. Finally, Nia pulled back, wiped her face with her sleeve. "Are you scared?" she asked. Terence nodded. "Yeah." "Of playing bad?" "No, of remembering." She looked at him, confused. "Music was mine and your mom's thing," he said. "We spoke to each other through it. When she died, it felt like speaking to someone who couldn't answer anymore. So I stopped." Nia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very simply, "Mom would want you to play." Terrence's chest tightened. He closed his eyes, saw Grace in their old apartment, saw her at his shows, saw her in the hospital bed, weak and small, weren't telling him to keep making beauty after she was gone. He opened his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "She would." Nia reached out, took his hand again, squeezed it. "Then play," she said. Terrence looked at his daughter, 11 years old, shaped by loss but not broken by it, strong in ways he was still learning to recognize. He squeezed her hand back. The rental guitar still leaned against the wall, waiting. He stood, helped Nia to her feet, picked up the guitar. The ballroom doors opened down the hall. The event coordinator appeared. "Mr. Holloway, we're ready for you." Terrence looked down at Nia. She looked up at him. And together, father and daughter walked toward the ballroom where 200 people waited to hear a man who'd been silent for 7 years finally speak again. The penthouse ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers. Their 200 donors filled the seats, their jewelry catching the light, their evening gowns and tuxedos worth more than Terrence made in a year. The New England Philharmonic sat on the raised stage in perfect formation, and in the second row of the guitar section, wearing a faded custodian uniform with a bleach stain across one sleeve, sat Terrence Holloway. His taped work boots rested on the polished floor. His hands held the rental Martin Classical. Around him, musicians in formal concert dress adjusted their instruments, their sheet music crisp and clean. Terrence looked small, out of place, wrong. But he was here. Nia sat in the front row, her school uniform still on, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes never left her father. 3 seats over, a Tanglewood board member leaned toward his wife, whispering. Behind them, 2 journalists sat with cameras ready. Marlowe stepped onto the podium. The lights dimmed. The room went quiet. The concert began. The first half was standard repertoire. Mozart, Brahms, pieces the orchestra could play in their sleep. Marlowe conducted with sharp, precise movements. His white hair caught the stage lights. His jaw was tight. He didn't look at Terrence once. The music was technically perfect, emotionally sterile. At intermission, the ballroom erupted. Donors stood in clusters, talking in low, excited voices. Several took photos of Terrence from a distance. He sat still in his chair, the guitar resting on his knee. A journalist approached. "Mr. Holloway, can I ask?" "Not right now, please." The journalist backed off. Terrence closed his eyes, breathed. The weight of what was coming pressed down on him. Nia appeared at his side. Someone had given her a bottle of water. She handed it to him without speaking. He drank. She squeezed his shoulder, went back to her seat. Backstage, Marlowe gathered the orchestra in a tight circle. His voice was low but sharp enough to carry. "The second half is what matters. The concerto. My reputation is on the line tonight, which means yours is too. You follow my baton. You play exactly what's written. No improvisation, no deviation. Do you understand?" The musicians nodded, but Lorraine caught the eye of the second violinist, then the principal cellist. A silent conversation passed between them. They had other plans. The audience settled back into their seats. The lights dimmed again. Marlowe returned to the podium. He raised his baton. The orchestra lifted their instruments. The concerto began. On the strings and woodwinds built the opening theme, a baroque melody, elegant and restrained. Then the rhythm shifted, flamenco underneath. Traditional meeting modern, East meeting West. It was the kind of piece that could showcase brilliance or expose mediocrity. Terrence sat motionless, waiting. Measure 12 arrived, his cue. He brought the guitar up, positioned his fingers. The first note rang out clear and true. He played the written line exactly as composed. No flourishes, no variation. Just the notes on the page. The audience relaxed slightly. This was good, professional, What they'd expected after the audition. Terrence continued. His fingers moved with practiced precision. The flamenco runs were clean. The counterpoint was balanced. He played like a hired session musician, competent, forgettable. Nia watched. Her hands were still folded, but her brow furrowed slightly. This wasn't the man she'd heard in the hallway. This wasn't the father who just told her about grace and music and choosing love over everything else. This was someone hiding. Measure 20, measure 25. The piece unfolded predictably. Marlowe conducted with growing confidence. See, this is how it's done. Control, precision, order. Measure 30 arrived. Terrence's hands shifted position on the fretboard. Just slightly. A small adjustment no one in the audience would notice. But Lorraine saw it. Her bow paused mid-stroke for half a second. Then she kept playing. Measure 31, 32, 33. Terrence's breathing changed, slower, deeper. His shoulders dropped. His grip on the guitar neck softened. He wasn't reading the sheet music anymore. His eyes were closed. In the front row, Nia leaned forward. Measure 34 arrived, and Terrence's fingers began to improvise. The first note bent wrong, not wrong in pitch, wrong in intention. Terrence's fingers pulled the string sharp, then released it slow, letting it slide down like a voice breaking. Then he added a harmonic overtone the composer had never written. A ghost note underneath the melody that made it sound like two guitars playing at once. The first violinist's bow faltered, stuttered, stopped. She turned her head, stared at Terrence. He didn't stop. His right hand moved across the strings in rasgato technique, but instead of the crisp flamenco attack written in the score, he layered jazz phrasing over it. Syncopation, swing, call and response with himself. He took the Baroque structure and wove blues through it like thread through fabric. The cellos dropped out next, one by one, their bows lifting, then the violas, the second violins. Terrence's eyes were closed. His face was calm. His fingers knew where to go without thinking. This was the language he'd spoken for 20 years before going silent. The thing Wynton Marsalis had heard at the Village Vanguard and recognized as something beyond technique. Music that didn't ask permission. Music that told the truth. Within 15 seconds, the entire orchestra had stopped playing. They turned away from Marlowe's podium. Instruments lowered. Bows hung at their sides. Every musician's eyes were on Terrence, on his hands moving across the fretboard, on the way his shoulders curved over the guitar like he was protecting something fragile. Marlowe's baton was still moving, up, down. Cueing entrances no one followed. His mouth opened slightly, his face flushed red, then drained pale. He realized what was happening. He was conducting empty air. His orchestra had abandoned him, but he couldn't stop. His arm kept moving, smaller now, the arc shrinking, until finally his hand just hovered in the air, frozen. Terrence played alone. The only sound in the penthouse ballroom was a single guitar and the man playing it. 200 donors leaned forward in their seats. No one moved. No one coughed. No one checked their phones. In the front row, Nia's hands were clasped together so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Tears ran down her face. Silent. Her lips moved slightly, forming words no one could hear. In the back, both journalists had their cameras up, recording. Terrence played for 60 seconds that felt like an hour. He channeled everything he'd buried for 7 years. Grace's face in the hospital, Nia as an infant in the NICU, wires and tubes keeping her alive, the debt collector calls, the Gibson ES 175 being carried out of his apartment, the first night shift at Cornerstone Tower, the braiding of Nia's hair on Sunday mornings, the sound of her cello through the wall, every sacrifice, every silent year, every moment he'd chosen love over everything else. The music sounded like longing, like loss, like a conversation between joy and grief where neither one won. He bent the final note, held it, let it hover for 3 full seconds. Then he resolved it down to a quiet, unresolved chord that hung in the air like a question with no answer. The note faded, died, became silence. And the ballroom was absolutely still. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then Lorraine Chen stood. She didn't move slowly. She rose like she'd been shocked, her violin and bow still in her hands. She started clapping, hard, fast. The sound echoed in the silent room. The musician next to her stood, then another. Then the entire orchestra was on its feet, clapping, stomping. Some of them had tears on their faces. The donors erupted, 200 people rising as one. The sound was deafening. Applause like thunder, shouting. Someone whistled. The Tanglewood board members were standing too, clapping with their hands above their heads. Nia was sobbing, her small hands clapping so hard they must have hurt. Her face was wet, her mouth was open. She looked at her father like she was seeing him for the first time, and also like she'd always known exactly who he was. Terence sat very still. The guitar rested on his knee. His hands lay on the strings, quiet now. He looked at his daughter, just at her. The rest of the room could have been empty. Marlowe stood at the podium. His baton hung limp in his hand. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were wide. The applause crashed around him like waves, but none of it was for him. He'd been erased, made invisible in his own concert, utterly eclipsed. The applause went on, and on. Lorraine was crying now, too. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, still clapping. Other musicians did the same. This wasn't polite donor applause. This was recognition, validation, the witnessing of something true. In the fifth row, a young woman held up her phone. The screen showed a recording in progress. Timestamp, 1 minute, 43 seconds. At the top of the screen, a notification appeared. She'd posted it to social media. The view count was already climbing. 50 views, 100, 200, 500. The applause began to fade. People sat, wiped their eyes, looked at each other. Marlowe tried to regain control. He raised his baton, gestured to the orchestra, but no one was watching him anymore. Lorraine walked off the stage, down the steps, straight to Terence. She stood in front of him, extended her hand. Terence stood, shook it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was thick, "for reminding us what music is supposed to sound like." The donors were on their feet again, not applauding this time, just standing, watching. And the journalists moved closer, cameras still rolling. Marlowe stepped down from the podium. He left the stage through the side door, didn't look back. On the young woman's phone screen, the view count kept climbing. 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. And in the front row, Nia stood up. She walked to the edge of the stage. Her father saw her coming. He stepped down, met her at floor level. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his waist and held on. Terence's hand rested on her head, his eyes closed. Around them, the ballroom buzzed with voices, excited, awed, people pulling out their phones, texting, calling. The Tanglewood board members were in a tight circle, talking in low, urgent tones. But Terence didn't hear any of it. He just held his daughter and breathed. The video hit 10,000 views by midnight. By dawn, 500,000. Custodian silences Boston Orchestra with 90 seconds of genius. The title wrote itself. The footage was shaky but clear enough. Terence in his faded uniform under stage lights. The orchestra falling silent one by one. Marlowe conducting Empty Air. Nia crying in the front row. The final 7 seconds of absolute stillness before the eruption. People shared it, commented, tagged friends. By Monday morning, news outlets were calling. Journalists did what journalists do. They dug. They found the old footage from Newport 2003. The grainy video of Terence at 25 playing with Wynton Marsalis. They found the Blue Note announcement from 2005, the tour dates that stopped abruptly in 2006, and then they found the rest. Grace's obituary, medical debt records, Nia's premature birth, the sale of the Gibson ES-175 to a private collector in New Hampshire. The custodial job application dated 3 weeks after Grace's funeral. The narrative assembled itself like pieces of a song. Humble father, hidden genius, medical tragedy, silent sacrifice, cruel conductor, redemption. It was the kind of story the internet devoured. Marlowe tried damage control on Tuesday. He released a statement through the Philharmonic's publicist. called it an extraordinary evening of artistic discovery, said he'd recognized Terence's potential immediately, claimed that inviting him to perform was an act of artistic courage and generosity. The statement lasted 6 hours. Then the audio leaked. Someone at the concert had recorded Marlowe backstage during intermission. His voice was clear, sharp, annoyed. "Follow my baton exactly. No improvisation. I will not be upstaged by some custodian in rags playing to the cheap seats." The word rags echoed. People posted it everywhere, wanted to cut it into clips, remixed it, turned it into a rallying cry. The Philharmonic's board received 800 complaint emails in 48 hours. Donors threatened to withdraw funding. Musicians from other orchestras posted statements of support for Terence. 3 major music publications ran editorials about elitism and gatekeeping in classical music. 2 weeks after the concert, the Tanglewood announcement came. The music directorship went to someone else, a conductor from Chicago, quiet, respectful. The press release thanked all candidates for their interest. Marlowe's name wasn't mentioned. He left Boston 3 days later, back to Europe. No farewell concert, no statement, just gone. But Terence didn't follow the news. He was working his shift at Cornerstone Tower the night the Tanglewood announcement dropped, mopping the same floors he'd mopped for 7 years. The tower's management had asked if he wanted to take time off. He'd said no. He needed the routine, the quiet, the familiar rhythm of work that asked nothing but his hands and his time. The offers came anyway. Berkeley called first. The dean of the guitar department, an older woman with a kind voice. She'd seen him play at Newport in 2003. She offered him a position, artist in residence, jazz guitar, teaching 2 master classes per week, mentoring students one-on-one. The salary was more than he'd made in 3 years of night shifts. It would clear the medical debt. All of it. Blue Note called next. They still had the contract offer from 2005 in their files. They wanted to record the album he never made. His choice of material, his timeline, no pressure. And then came the anonymous letter, hand-delivered to his apartment, no return address, just a cashier's check for $36,000 and a note on expensive stationery. For Naya's tuition through high school, she deserves to play without worry, so does her father. It was signed by someone who'd been in the audience, one of the Tanglewood board members. Terence would never know which one. 3 days after the concert, Terence took Nia to a music store in Cambridge, a small shop near Harvard Square that smelled like wood and rosin. Guitars hung on every wall, acoustic, electric, classical, vintage. They walked through slowly. Nia touched the instruments gently, reverently. Terence let her lead. She stopped in front of a Guild acoustic, sunburst finish, warm tone. Not expensive, not legendary, just honest. "Go with this one," she said. Terence lifted it off the wall, sat on the bench by the window, played a few chords. The sound filled the small shop. Clean, true, it felt right in his hands. He bought it. They walked home together, Nia carrying the case, Terence carrying her cello. That night, for the first time since Grace died, Terence played music in their apartment, not practicing, not rehearsing, just playing. He sat on the couch. Nia sat across from him with her cello. He started with a simple melody, a blues progression in E, slow and gentle. Nia listened for a few measures. Then she joined. Her bow moved across the strings, finding harmony, counterpoint. The 2 instruments wove together, guitar and cello, father and daughter, their small Mattapan apartment filled with sound. They played for an hour. No sheet music, no plan. I'm not just listening to each other and responding. When they stopped, Nia was smiling. Really smiling. The kind of smile Terence hadn't seen since before Grace got sick. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" she asked. "Every night, baby girl." The weeks passed. Terence finished his notice at Cornerstone Tower, started at Berkeley in September. The students were young, hungry. Some were technically brilliant. Some were still learning. All of them knew who he was, what he'd done, what he'd survived. He taught them about technique, about theory, about the mechanics of jazz guitar and the history of the instrument. But mostly he taught them about truth. 6 months after the concert, on a cold March morning, Terrence drove to Forest Hills Cemetery. Nia sat beside him. Lorraine followed in her own car. They parked near the entrance. When walked together through the grounds, past old headstones and bare trees. The ground was still frozen. Their breath made clouds in the air. Grace's grave was simple, a flat marker with her name, her dates, and a single line Terrence had chosen. She painted light. Terrence sat on the ground. Nia sat beside him. Lorraine stood a few steps back, giving them space. He took out the guild, tuned it. The cold made the strings tight. He adjusted, waited. Then he played. The blues ballad he'd written for Grace during their first year together. The one he'd played for her in their tiny New York apartment while she painted. The one she'd asked him to play again in the hospital when she was too weak to speak but still strong enough to smile. His fingers moved slowly, carefully, each note deliberate. Now the melody was simple, but the emotion underneath was vast. Love, loss, gratitude. The knowledge that some people change you so completely that even after they're gone, they're still shaping who you become. When he finished, Nia was crying, silent tears on her cheeks. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" she asked. Terrence set the guitar down, pulled his daughter close. Her head rested against his shoulder. He looked at the headstone, at Grace's name carved in granite. "Your mom knew who I was," he said quietly. "She didn't care about the music or the fame. She cared about the man, and that man is still here, still standing, because of you." Nia pressed closer. "I'm glad you're playing again." "Me too, baby girl." They sat for a while longer. The wind moved through the bare branches. Cars passed on the road outside the cemetery, with life continuing, moving forward, the way it always does. A year after the concert, Terrence stood in front of 23 students in a Berkeley practice room. The space was warm, sunlit, acoustic panels on the walls. His students sat in a semicircle. Some held guitars, others had notebooks. All of them were watching him. On the wall behind his desk, mounted in a shadow box, were his old work boots, the ones held together with electrical tape, the ones he'd worn on stage that night, a reminder, not of where he'd been, but of the journey that brought him here. On his desk sat a framed photo. Grace at 28, paint-stained hands, bright smile, forever young. In the back of the room, Nia sat with her homework spread across a table. Her cello case leaned against the wall beside her. She looked up occasionally, watched her father teach, then went back to her algebra. Terrence was mid-sentence, explaining the relationship between melody and improvisation, how the written notes are a foundation, not a cage, how the best music happens when you trust yourself enough to leave the map. He paused, smiled, picked up his guitar. "Let me show you what I mean," he said, and he began to play.